He moved through the city with the same agility as ever, skittering up the glass walls, poised between shadow and neon. 5 stories up, the mask's white eyelets narrowed as he watched the crime unfold. But this time, the man hanging from Spider-Man's web wasn't a criminal. He was someone who owed Peter Parker money. And justice? That wasn't the priority anymore. Peter Parker had always been the charming, clumsy, well-meaning graduate student, dodging rent, struggling with relationships, haunted by guilt over Uncle Ben. That used to motivate him. With great power comes great responsibility. It was practically a curse. Every web he spun, every punch he pulled, had been about making up for one night of reckless inaction. But years have a way of wearing anyone down. The city changed, and with it so did Peter. The grating headlines, thankless rescues, the way the Daily Bugle twisted every act of heroism Spider Menace. They called him. J. Jonah Jameson was relentless, and eventually Peter felt something inside him shift. For once, he took off the mask and looked in the mirror, searching for the naive promise that used to keep him on the straight and narrow. But all he saw was a man with more potential than the world deserved. The transition wasn't sudden. First, it was petty crime. Then, a little intimidation here and there. He realized he could get rent, favors, confessions, anything, really. Spider-Man was fear, and that was a tool. Why waste potential on thankless heroics when he could shape the city instead? The city responded with terror. At first, it was subtle criminals who once scattered at the sound of webs were now leaving burnt offerings, terrified he might show up. He didn't show up to stop them. Instead, he made visits whenever it suited him, choosing his targets not by the laws they broke, but by what they had to offer in return. And it was efficient. Information, money, respect, all caught up in the web, all at his disposal. Soon, his relationships with other so-called heroes began to strain. Daredevil watched him in Hell's Kitchen, tracking new patterns in crime, fewer muggings, but more disappearances. Black Cat, who'd walked the line between lover and rival, now found herself dodging his surveillance rather than flirting with it. Peter's dual life as a public menace and private kingpin was never in perfect balance. Sometimes he craved the old days not for the glory, but for the clarity. Now everyone, from mob bosses to mayors, called him for favors, but not even Aunt May would recognize what he'd become. He'd long since abandoned confiding in her. The last time he tried to visit, her hands trembled at the impossibly faint sound of webbing above her porch. He didn't knock. When the Avengers tried to intervene, he toyed with them. Tony Stark found his systems hacked, secret files exposed with a signature picture of a red and blue web. Steve Rogers, Captain America himself, found his shield webbed to a skyscraper 40 floors up. There was little anyone could prove, and even less they could stop. When your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man turns, there aren't many neighborhoods left with hope. Occasionally, Peter indulged in irony. The city begged him to return to heroism. The Bugle now ran editorials praying for his protection. He laughed. The city never really cared for Spider-Man, they cared for what he could give. So now he gave them fear. He built himself a kingdom of secrets. It was efficient, cleaner than anyone would expect. Organized crime rates dropped because he ran them. The web stretched everywhere. Police, politicians, rivals, all bound up and waiting to be plucked when he needed. New York was his web, and he was at the center, patient, methodical. But the thing about power is that it never lets you rest. He slept lightly. A sense of paranoia replaced the old guilt. He checked rooftops, listened to scanners, watched for patterns. Was that Daredevil in the alley 2 blocks over? Did he see a glint of Stark tech glimmering on a nearby satellite? Every night the city was quieter, but only on the surface. One night, Spider-Man perched atop the Chrysler Building, staring out over the grid of streets. He thought of Uncle Ben, of May, of Mary Jane, somewhere far below, living in a city run not by heroes, but by him. The mask covered his face, but it couldn't hide how far he'd gone. This story doesn't end with redemption. After all, with great power comes great opportunity. For most, that means responsibility. For Spider-Man, the Spider-Man of this city, at this time, it just meant that the city would never escape his web. The city had begged for a protector. Now it had a ruler. And the night went on with one more spider in the dark, watching as his kingdom slept.